Hello nerds, geeks and fantastic beasts, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to talk about the Saga of Darren Shan. The Saga of Darren Shan consists out of 12 books, which I have right here in front of me. I just bought them at the beginning of this year because they were on sale on a website that I just kind of like check for books every now and then. And I got a good deal on these, so I just decided to buy them because I remember that reading them when I was younger. And I wanted to read them in English because when I read books back then, they were all in Dutch, of course. And I really wanted to read them in English, so that's why I got them. And I was going on vacation, I think this was like the end of January, beginning of February. So COVID wasn't really around back then, or wasn't an issue back then for us. We were still allowed to go on vacation, so I took these with me on vacation to read them. Of course, I couldn't read them all in just 1 week, and after like having school and stuff happening in between, I just only managed to finish them like last week. But anyway, I want to talk about them because I love these books and they have a very special place in my heart. I read these when I was vampire crazy, and someone in my school did a book report on the first book. Right here, the book that's called Cirque du Freak. And yeah, he convinced me really to really read the book because what he told me I all liked. And we watched the movie because there's a movie of like the first 2 books, I think, and then like some stuff from the end. It's been a while since I seen the movie. We watched it in class actually because our teacher liked the book report a lot as well. So yeah, he left a good impression for the books of Darren Shan. So like I said, these are 12 books and they are split up into 4 trilogies, which in my case have 4 different colors. The first trilogy is called the Vampire Blood Trilogy, or like referred to as the Vampire Blood Trilogy. The first book is called Cirque du Freak and it's the beginning of everything. It starts with Darren and you follow him through his daily life until you see him find a flyer for a circus performance, like a freak show. And he goes there with his best friend Steve, where he meets the vampire called Larton Crepsley. And Larton Crepsley has this amazing looking spider called Madame Octa. And Darren was immediately in love with the spider because he was like a big fan of spiders. He was always obsessed with them and had a big interest in them. He stole the spider from Mr. Crepsley and ended up showing it to his best friend Steve, who ended up getting bitten. And the way to save Steve's life was to become the assistant of Mr. Crepsley. To become an assistant of a vampire, you have to become a half vampire yourself, which leads us into the vampire's assistant, where a lot of Darren getting used to his life as a half vampire happens, and he lives with the circus now. So then we have Tunnel of Blood, which is a little bit feels a little bit of a filler at times. This book touches on a lot of important things that happen and are relevant for the rest of the books, but it just feels sometimes a little bit like a filler. This reads different as the other two. Like this feels more like a police novel than it does with the other ones. This is actually more of a fantasy series than you would say like these are just vampire books, because they're more than just vampire books. And a lot of these books I notice have like a little bit of a different genre to them, which is really interesting because the story remains cohesive. The way that the books are written remains cohesive, but every story feels like a different kind of genre of book. The second trilogy is my favorite trilogy, which is the Vampire Rites trilogy. The reason why it's my favorite is because it has my favorite setting out of all the books, which is Vampire Mountain, and you learn a lot about the way the vampires live, what their values are, how it comes that there's like an evil kind of vampires called Vampinese, what happened there, and why they're like a little bit on edge with each other and everything around that. And it's honestly so amazing how the world of vampires can be built. Because like vampires is something that we all know about, of course, and we have read and heard dozens of stories about them. Yet this kind of like setup feels fresh to me, and that's amazing, honestly. I love the characters that are set up in these books as well. Like that's just a general like line throughout these books, is that I love the way the characters are written. Like the books really make you care about the characters, and honestly props to Darren Shan for writing them like that. I don't often care about characters this much as I did with these books, because there are a lot of like side characters, like a guy called Mika Verlet. Like, he barely appears in the books, and I was like, he's one of my favorites. And that's just because, like, the way the characters are written makes you instantly care and like them. So that's something I had to add right here. It's very hard for me to pick my favorite book out of this saga, but there are two that are really strong contenders for it, and one of them is in this series as well, which would have to be Trials of Death. It has these trials that Darren has to go through, and like following Darren in his way to prepare these and actually complete the tasks is so nice to read, and you just constantly want to root for Darren to succeed because he wants to prove that he's going to be right for a vampire, while also thinking like, I don't want to embarrass my mentor, and there's just so many layers to all of this, and that's why this one is strong contender for favorite. The third trilogy is the Vampire War Trilogy. This trilogy, these 3 books are my least favorite from the whole series. That's not to say that they are bad, of course, because I enjoyed every book out of this, but this feels a little bit like too much of a setup for what's going to come. Yeah, I don't know, it just doesn't, like, it takes Darren and his crew back to the human world, and I feel that's just a little bit less interesting than when it was when we were at Vampire Mountain or at the Cirque. So yeah, this handles like the prophecy kind of trope that fantasy novels have a lot really well and really nicely. Because it doesn't set up our hero to be the perfect person or the perfect hero. He could just as well be the villain. If you've read the books, you probably know what I mean with this, but yeah. That's what makes it interesting, I think. And it's nice to see how like vampires and vampanese would go to war, because they have certain values that don't allow them to just go to war like any human would. And the way they do this is really interesting, and also, like I said, the characters are very interesting, and is honestly what keeps you going throughout these stories. I don't have much else to say about these 3 books, so I'm just gonna put them right back. Then lastly, we have the Vampire Destiny trilogy. These books are a really good ending to the whole saga, because it ties up all the loose ends that were introduced in the other books. Like, there's so many mysteries and questions set up in these books that you don't get an immediate answer to, and in these books they get answered. I'm not gonna like give any spoilers because that would ruin the mystery if you haven't read them and planning on reading them, so I'm not gonna do that. But I would have to say like Lake of Souls is my second contender for favorite book because of this, because it tackles a huge mystery that I've been wondering about since like the beginning. It also uses such a beautiful setting, like like, can you see the consistency here? Like, I like the books that have a nice setting that's usually not in the human world, because I mostly read books to like escape the normal human world. And this one takes you to a whole other universe, actually. So that's why I really like this one. And similarly to Trials of Death, this one introduces like a series of tasks that they need to complete to reach their goal, and it introduces a lot of nice world building again. I love world building. And it uses the characters that you really care about, which is Darren and also Harkat. Like, Harkat, I don't know if I'm supposed to pronounce it like the way I would pronounce it, or like more English, like Harkat. I don't know, I just say Harkat always, so I'm just gonna stick to that. So yeah, Harkat is someone that gets introduced in the first books. In the beginning you're like, who is this? Why am I supposed to care? But by the time you reach Lake of Souls, you really care about Harkat. And this book is really more about Harkat than it is about Darren, which is why I also really like this book, because I love the focus on the little person. So it's really hard to choose between this one and Trials of Death, because they both use some of the tropes that I like the most in books. So yeah, Lord of the Shadows and Sons of Destiny. So these 2 books tie it all up together and give you a nice ending. However, I have to say that I didn't find the ending very satisfying, because it's a little bit open-ended. And that's something that kind of bothers me in stories most of the time. I like a clear-cut ending. The ending really makes use of everything that has been introduced before, and of a character named Mr. Tiny, or Mr. Destiny. The way he gets used to make this ending complete is really nice. I like the way that ties up some loose ends as well. And I like the way that Darren Shan like makes it as if like, yeah, he was like, the book is called The Saga of Darren Shan, written by Darren Shan about Darren Shan. So the way he closes it off is really nicely. tying into the fact that the author could be the person that lived through it all. If you've read it, again, you will understand what I mean. Like, it gives a nice closure to everything that you've just read, because you're like, could this be real? Of course, probably not, but you know what I mean. So yeah, like I said, what gets me through these books the most is the characters. The characters are very interesting, very well written, and you really care about them, because the way the books are written, you just wanna support all of them. Well, most of them, of course, the good guys, or like from our perspective, the good guys. Because it really is ambiguous, like, who's supposed to be the good and the bad guy, because of course, like, from the perspective of Darren, he and the vampires are the, like, good guys, but from someone else's perspective, it could be otherwise. Like, from a human, the perspective could be different, and from a Vampinese, the perspective could be different. So that's something that's kind of, like, nice when you read the books, because it tackles that notion a little bit as well. So what are my final thoughts? These books are really amazing to me. It's my favorite kind of vampire story, although I feel bad saying vampire story, because these are just like fantasy books. Like, this is such a nice world to go through. And honestly, the books are very easy to read. Like, usually when I do open one, I finish it in one day. The latter ones took me a little bit longer, because I could only read on the bus to school and from school. So although it was a really nice escape every time I came from school, like, to just disappear in different world for an hour before getting back to school stuff. And they're real page turners too. Like, you're constantly on the edge of your seat, like, what's going to happen next? I want to see what goes next, or how is it going to solve this problem? How is this going to end? And the way it's written, it just makes you want to keep going and going and going. And it's nicely written, so it's easy to read, in my opinion. Of course, if I'm not mistaken, these books are targeted more to young teenagers. Like, 2020 marks the year that I become 22, so I'm probably like, this is probably easier to read for me than a child. But then again, I'm not a native English speaker, so English books are supposed to be more difficult for me to read than Dutch books, although I feel like it's the other way around sometimes. But yeah, if you like fantasy books, like, say, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones even, go for these books. Like, give them a try, because they're a really nice fantasy story, and I think they should actually be appreciated as much as those books are, because I feel like not a lot of people know about these books. And it makes me sad, because, like I said, this is a book series that's really near and dear to my heart. And I wish kind of that, like, some of, especially the Vampire Rites trilogy, should be a movie or a show, because I think there's so much to do with that, and I would watch the hell out of that. This story is a beautiful one. It's great from beginning to end. I have to say, there are certain books that feel a little bit more like it's supposed to fill, like, some information in between one and the other. But they're never boring to read. They're always interesting and well written, and there's always loads happening, so you're never bored when reading these books. So those were my final thoughts on these books. I hope this could help you if you were deciding whether you were going to read them or not. If you disagree or agree with me on some points, please let me know in the comments below. I might do more talking about books in the future, because I'm starting to read a lot again. Thanks to these books, actually. So thank you so much for that, Darren Shan. I hope you enjoyed watching this. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye!